his history, his background, and his experience really speaks to the kind of person I think that we are looking for. Matt grew up in Maryland and then joined the Coast Guard. Wound up getting transferred to Charleston, where I guess he fell in love with it down here and decided he wanted to do more. Went to the Citadel and then Charleston School of Law, Charleston College School of Law. And then he worked for a short time in the private sector, but sort of public-private. He worked for Blackbaud, which is a software company that does things for nonprofits. And I guess he felt that he wanted to do more. He became the assistant attorney for the town of Mount Pleasant, and then he was the attorney for the town of Hilton Head before deciding that he would better represent all of us running for Congress in the 1st District. So, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Matt Deford.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Afternoon.
If you have been given, I think, some smaller pamphlets, but if you would like a more detailed breakdown of our plan for how we're going to win this thing, and also some of our financial data, just raise your hand and someone from my team will bring that to you. But my name is Mac Deford, and an easy way to remember that, I promise you this will stick with you, is that it's not a Chevy, it's a Deford. Horrible, corny joke. You won't remember it. I'm running for Congress because I believe in protecting a woman's right to choose. I believe in codifying a woman's right to make her own healthcare decisions, including the right to seek an abortion. I'm running because the Lowcountry needs investment in its infrastructure. You all have stronger take. I mean, here in South Carolina, in the Lowcountry, we're very proud of our roads and transit systems, aren't we? I'm running because we need to make healthcare and education, quality healthcare and education, accessible to everyone here in the Lowcountry, not just a select few. South Carolina is 47th in the nation when it comes to public education. It means that children graduating from our schools here in South Carolina are amongst the least competitive in the United States. All this business coming in, it's not good for them. And this is a consequential election cycle. We've all been told that, but it really is. I mean, I really think that 2024 is going to determine, in large measure, what direction we are going to move in the country. Whether we're going to move forward, whether we're going to move backwards. Gail touched on my background a little bit. I've been wanting to be in public service ever since I was a kid. I was in 7th grade when I walked into math class one September morning. And I remember watching the TV that was on, which was odd for the news class. And it was the images of the World Trade Centers being hit. It was September 11th, 2001. I remember thinking about my father, who was an airline pilot flying that way. And coming home from school, and my mother coming home from work in tears because just a few years before, she flew the United 93 route often as a United flight attendant. And I told myself that night that I would do something when I had the opportunity to help prevent something like that from ever happening again. Now, it was really important to my mom that I go to college. But when I was 18 and I graduated from high school, my mom thought I was going to join the reserves. The Coast Guard recruiter asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, well, law enforcement, search and rescue, I want to be where the action is. And the recruiter said, well, yeah, then don't go in the reserves. You got to go active duty. And so I spent half a decade in the United States Coast Guard, and that's what brought me to Charleston. I served in the Coast Guard station right there on the beginning of the battery on Tradd Street. Part of my job was boarding container ships, searching for drugs, illegal contraband, explosives, nuclear material, search and rescue cases. I'm the only candidate in this race who's protected the border, our maritime borders. So when we're talking about immigration come the fall, I'll be well prepared for that topic. I continued my public service after a couple years in corporate law and our local governments. And I've worked on critical issues from infrastructure and road projects to affordable housing projects. I'm currently working on a massive workforce housing project on behalf of the town of Hilton Head Island. I was their general counsel, and now I'm in private practice helping them. It's the only thing I'm doing other than campaigning. But it was something that I started as general counsel. And it's the first of its kind in the state of South Carolina. And to my knowledge, the first of its kind in the Southeast and in the entire country. Imagine if we can get people to serve us and represent us in Congress that can take blueprints like that and turn them into national policy frameworks that we can use throughout the Low Country, not just for one municipality. I have gone to bat against the federal government to secure critical beach renourishment funds. I look at your coastline here, and I'm thinking how critical it is that communities like this receive federal funding and support to renourish your beaches, especially as they're eroded from both natural erosion but also storms, which we are prone to here in the Low Country. But again, this is a consequential election. And I was hearing Carol talking about some of the legislation that has been passed up in Columbia, which I actually just came from Columbia. We had a great time meeting with the Democratic caucus today. Our state legislators on the other side of the aisle have quite literally taken us back in time on women's reproductive rights. They have literally taken us back to 1960. I'm going to tell you a story of how damaging what they have done with their extreme 6-week abortion ban and what that can mean for families and individuals here in South Carolina. In 1960, there was a young woman who was 31 years old named Adele Marie Cochran. Adele lived in Delaware. She was the mother of 8 children, the wife of a bridge welder. And when she became pregnant with her 9th, her husband fell and could no longer work. And Adele ultimately made a very difficult but personal decision, heart-wrenching decision, especially in that time era and as Catholics, that she was going to seek an abortion. But in 1960, in Delaware, the laws were much like they are now here in South Carolina. That drove her to a back alley procedure, and 2 weeks later, on February 5th, 1960, at 31 years old, Adele died. She left behind 8 young children, a husband. One of those children was 5.5 years old, a little girl named Robin. Robin grew up to become my mother. Adele is my grandmother, who I never got to meet, who died 4 years younger than I am today. I'm 35. To make matters worse, the state looked at my grandfather and determined that he could not take care of 8 children on his own. And they broke the family unit up. That sent my mother into a broken foster care system, where she still suffers from the trauma that she experienced during her time there. She had loving memories of her mother, but her childhood is overshadowed by a completely shattered childhood. So I do not take seriously the politicians in Columbia that tell you that they are pro-life when they're not funding public education. They're not taking care of and making sure that there's investment in our foster care system. They say people can go and adopt. Well, there's over 4,000 children in South Carolina's foster care system. Where are these people lining up to adopt? They're not serious about people receiving health care because they didn't want to expand Medicaid. leaving over 300,000 people without coverage. So the first thing that the 119th Congress, when it is sworn in on January 3rd of next year, must do is introduce legislation to codify a woman's right to make her own decision and to choose. As a congressional representative, you have a small share of the national responsibility, right? Because you share that seat with 435 other members. But you have a lot of influence on what goes on locally. And I believe that our district needs someone that can help shed light on what we need with our infrastructure here in the Low Country, in all of our communities here. We have coastal communities like we are in now. We have rural communities. Some of those communities don't have access to clean water. We have urban areas. And yet, all of this wealth and all this attraction, this beauty that brings people here to the Low Country, and we have a road system that is not only neglected, but in many cases doesn't make any sense. Despite the fact that there seems to be funding lined up with SCDOT, with our county. So we need a congressional representative who knows who the stakeholders are, that can work with the local and state counterparts to make sure that we're keeping the ball moving as it comes to investing in our infrastructure. Housing, in my judgment, and in my experience, is the most critical, pressing need locally here in the Low Country. It impacts everyone, the lack of affordable housing. When I left the town of Mount Pleasant, there were 37 police officer vacancies. That means, on average, 10 fewer police officers that are not going to respond when somebody in Mount Pleasant dials 911. Teachers cannot afford to live in their communities where they are working, and they are leaving the teaching profession. Charleston, the Charleston area, Kiawah, is a tourist area, a huge tourism economy, and people cannot afford to live where they work or work where they live. And so we need a congressional representative, in my judgment, who's going to go and fight for affordable housing projects, quality affordable housing projects, and not just for rent, but for home ownership. The Charleston market and a lot of real estate markets here in the Low Country are artificially inflated. You have big corporations buying up the housing stock, flipping houses, selling them at an inflated price. So they're contributing to the crisis. I believe that they should be paying into a housing trust because of that. There has been legislation that has been introduced before. It has failed in Congress, and I believe the 119th Congress must pass it. And so, if you help to elect me, I will fight to get that passed. I want to open it up to a discussion because we are going to talk more about the issues, I think, more organically that way. But I want to tell you a little bit about this race. Because I would venture to say, if you've been here for at least a cycle or two, maybe you're a little dismayed. Because it's easy to become feeling beat down as a Democrat here in South Carolina. Especially when the other side had to cheat here in this district. When they cut out 30,000 of our fellow citizens because of the color of their skin. Cutting out 30,000 African American voters from Charleston County and putting them into Congressional District 6. As if you do not know, the federal district court ruled that this district was racially gerrymandered last January of 23. The Supreme Court, that decision was appealed to the Supreme Court. I actually went up October 11th of last year to observe oral arguments. The Supreme Court has not ruled on that case, despite the fact that they had no problem ruling on the Trump ballot case expeditiously. And now the district court, the same one that said these lines are illegal, said we will be running on them. So where does that leave us? Well, if you have the this document right here, if you look on the back, it gives you a little bit of a snapshot of our plan. This is the only congressional district in South Carolina that rejected Donald Trump in the Republican primary. In 2018, when Joe Cunningham flipped this district, it had a higher Republican rating than it does now. It was R plus 10 in 2018. It's R plus 7 today. You take that, you add the fact that this is the only congressional district that rejected Donald Trump in the Republican primary, and you also add to the fact that there are Republicans, former Nancy Mace donors, that have contributed to my campaign. We can win this. I receive correspondences, and my team almost daily, emails and letters from independents and Republicans who aren't necessarily Democrats, but they're looking at the situation of their party, and they're realizing that we are not going to move in any meaningful direction as a nation if we continue on with more of the same. And I ask you, what has Nancy Mace done for our district? I know you're not, probably no one is a Nancy Mace supporter, but I ask that to Republicans too. This district can be won. You'll see that, and we're giving you some confidential information here. Our win number is 181,849 voters. There are 257,425 persuadable voters in this district. Jenny, what? How many voters have we already contacted?
Y'all can't tell nobody.
Nope.
We've made over 200,000 contacts to voters, and we've made at least 1 to 4 contacts to every single one of those 200,000. We started field in December.
It's pretty significant. We have received unsolicited donations from Republicans from this, just from getting word out, but also the other day we sent a text blast out, and I got a donation from someone. I reached out to him for $1,000, and I called him and I said, did you get the text back? Because we looked him up, but he wasn't on the list. He said, no, but a friend of mine did, and he sent it to me. I said, are you a Democrat? He said, no, but I can't stand Nancy Mace. We have been doing very well this last quarter. We raised over $130,000, which is, we're neck and neck with my opponent on my Democratic opponent. Also, we have been deploying our field plan since December, but we're really ramping it up. My campaign manager, Jenny Ashley, in the back there, who just spoke, she ran Lisa Ellis's campaign last year. She was the candidate for state school superintendent, who on a budget of $300,000 garnered more votes than any other statewide Democrat in the 2022 election cycle. In large part because of the field plan that we are deploying right now here in the 1st Congressional District. Josh Hollington in the back there, he's my finance director. He's worked on local South Carolina campaigns, including Annie Andrews' campaign and Joe Cunningham's campaign. And then you'll see Dr. Adam Brown in the back. He is an ER physician, also strategy consultant, healthcare consultant, as well as my former professor at UNC, where one thing I did, in June I'll have an MBA from UNC Chapel Hill. Dr. Adam Brown was a professor who taught the challenges of healthcare course that I took there. So, we are doing well. And apparently Nancy Mace is concerned because I received a phone call the other day from a close former Republican supporter who talked with a former Nancy Mace staffer who said directly that Nancy Mace is worried if I win the primary. But I cannot do this without your help. And this is not the time to sit on the sidelines. We have a real shot at beating Nancy Mace in November. And I know she has an opponent, Catherine Templeton. Maybe Nancy Mace loses the nomination, but I doubt it. I think it's going to be Nancy Mace. And we cannot afford her any longer here in the Low Country. And, I mean, she will have a nice job at Fox News. Yes. When you relieve her of her responsibilities in Washington. So, I am asking for your support, whether that's volunteering and donations to help keep this going. We are at the final stretch here of the primary, and I would very much be appreciative of any support that you can lend us. So with that, I'll open up to any questions. I see one in the back there with David.
Yeah, with the primary coming up, we had your opponent here last month and heard from him. Can you distinguish yourself on the issues or in your experience or some other basis for why you would be the better candidate for the Democratic side?
Sure. Well, the only thing Michael and I have in common is we both worked together, actually, at Blackbaud, where he was the DEI officer most recently. And Michael and I, I mean, policy-wise, probably align pretty similar. We're both Democrats, but we're very different. I mean, I, in part, another reason why I'm running is I believe that my generation needs to start stepping up and being cycled in to have more share of the national responsibility. Only about 12% of millennials make up the U.S. House of Representatives. We don't need all the seats at the table, but we've got some fresh ideas and perspective that can complement the experienced members that are there currently. Michael's background is in business, which is great. But I have hands-on experience with a lot of our local issues. I'm the only candidate in this race who's actually worked on affordable housing projects. I have experience working with our municipalities, with our counties, with our state representatives. I have good relationships with them, which you need that as a member of Congress. If you're looking to get things done, you need to be able to work with the local counterparts so that when you're going and fighting for funding, that you know that they're in lockstep with you. So when we're talking about making investments in our roadways, that the counties and DOT is actually going to do what we're going to get that funding for. And I would also say too, I mean, this is a heavy military district. So being a veteran, it does count here, especially with that crossover support. Being that there are a lot of Republicans and independents who are veterans and retirees and active duty, but you have the Navy Air Force Base in North Charleston, the Coast Guard base, which will be the largest Coast Guard installation in the United States over the next 5 years in North Charleston. And then you have the Marines down in Deford. I think Michael's a great guy. But I do think that from what I've heard from constituents, people are looking for the next generation to step up and someone that has practical experience with the issues that we must face here in the Low Country. Yes, sir.
I had and have a tremendous amount of respect for Andy Andrews. I'd like to know if you are prepared to go at Nancy Mace harder than she did. She's going to be a tough opponent, but I think she's a treasure trove of oppo research. Her voting record over the last 2 years is hideous. I just want to know, I'd like to hear how hard you're going to go with her.
So, anything above the belt, free game. And we're going to come out here with everything. And you're absolutely right. Look, I have a lot of respect for Dr. Amy Andrews. I think she's a wonderful person. And I believe in the work that she has been doing and that she continues to do. In 2022, the cracks in Nancy Mace's foundation were not as apparent as they are now. She had everyone fooled. I mean, now, if you were paying attention, no. But she had, I mean, I remember there were commercials with CNN talking about, they're trying to kind of characterize their reporting as more balanced. So they had some, moderate Republicans, Democrats, and they had Nancy in the commercial saying, I'm an independent caucus of one, right? So she had all of them pulled. Not anymore. They pulled her from that. I think the first dive she took was when she voted against the bipartisan infrastructure law, and then showed up to take credit for the $26 million in CARTA funding that came to the Low Country. Nancy Mace is extremely vulnerable, and her own party has been rejected. And I think that the Republican Party is in shambles right now. But she has made a lot of enemies with her own party. So yeah, we are going to go after Nancy Mace to expose her, for how detrimental she's been to the Low Country and just how reckless and irresponsible she is in general. Thanks. I think over here and then you back there.
Can you talk for a minute about Ukraine aid and aid to Israel? And because those just seem like really big sticking point issues right now. So
yeah. So I wholeheartedly believe that we must do everything to support Ukraine. Russia is not our friend. Putin is not our friend. Everything that we're doing right now, we're expending a very small percentage of our defense budget, and Ukraine has been just absolutely crushing. I mean, our own intelligence sources told us that Ukraine would fall in a matter of weeks, and here we are 2+ years later, and they are fighting without U.S. boots being on the ground and a loss of U.S. life. I have a niece who's in the Air Force, and she would probably be one of the first ones called up to go to Europe if war touched a NATO ally. I don't want to see that happen. I have friends that are still in the military, and they would be called up to service. I don't want to see them go into a war in Europe. So we must do everything we can to support Ukraine to make sure that they fend off Russia, because if Russia comes onto the border of a NATO ally and they attack a NATO ally, we are at war. The situation in Israel is very complicated. Israel is an ally. The Israeli people are friends to the United States. I believe in supporting their fight against terrorism and those conventional forces that wish to do them harm. But I am gravely concerned about the humanitarian crisis and impacts that it's having on the people in Gaza. So I do support their efforts. However, I do have strong concerns about the way and the strategy in which the war is being fought. So I support humanitarian ceasefires that would get aid to the people, making sure that there are observers there that are ensuring that the aid is getting to the people that it needs to get to. But I also believe that the situation in Ukraine and what's happening in Israel, they are interconnected. Iran is a huge supplier. Iran and Russia have a very strong military alliance, and Iran has strong alliances with the terrorist organizations that are attacking Israel. So it is a big issue. But above all else, I do believe that diplomacy should be exercised 100% to the maximum effect before any sort of combat operations ensue. So, and I do think that Israel needs to display what that strategy is going to look like, where there is an end in sight, so that we are not stuck with a long-term war in the Middle East. Sir?
In in the brochure you circulated, you say he'll protect Social Security and Medicare. Can you be more specific? Because there are some members of Congress who say the way to protect it is to shrink Social Security and Medicare, increase requirements, etc. So can you be more specific of what you mean by protecting Social Security and Medicare?
Sure. I mean, Social Security is a promise that has been promised to folks that they pay into it, and when they hit a certain age, they're going to be able to draw from it. The argument that we can't pay for that for Social Security, or we can't pay for Medicare, that is true if you're going to give corporate bailouts to big companies. That is true if someone who makes $160-some thousand is paying into the same amount in Social Security as a billionaire. But that doesn't need to be the case. So I do think that we can protect it. I don't believe that we should be talking about increasing the age for Social Security. I do think that Medicare should be protected, and we shouldn't be stressed out. I mean, look, I don't want to be stressed out about whether or not a program that I'm paying into is going to be there or not when I hit the retirement age of Medicare. And I believe that also we have to expand not just that, but Medicaid. South Carolina didn't expand Medicaid. And so there are, I think, workaround solutions to ensure that those people receive health care coverage. Because at the end of the day, if we have uninsured people, it's going to drive the health care cost up. So there is actually an economic argument for protecting Social Security and Medicare by just the simple basis of people having health care and with that preventative care. Yes, back here. Sorry, and then you missed.
I think it will be interesting to hear and in your favor to have a Democrat who's been in the military and to hear your position on gun reform.
Sure.
I mean, I know that's something we all care about.
Yeah. So I will say this. Look, I was a Coast Guard law enforcement officer. I think, yeah, I know Republicans have a Republican candidate who's a Marine, but I'm the only candidate in this race that has a law enforcement background. Before I got stationed in Charleston, I was at Coast Guard Police Department in Baltimore, Maryland, and we went off base a lot to help the locals out. Coast Guard is a unique military branch in that it has federal law enforcement authority. That's the only branch of the military that has law enforcement authority. All the other branches cannot. So I have seen firsthand the impacts of gun violence from a young age. When I was 19, I completed all my training. And so, look, I'm a gun owner. My guns are at home. They're locked up. The ammunition is locked up in a separate safe. That should be the standard. But I'm a statistical outlier in South Carolina. There is no reason why it should be the law in South Carolina or any other state that an 18-year-old or anyone over the age of 18 can walk into a gun store, buy a gun, having never even looked at a gun before, fill it with ammo, and go walk down a public sidewalk in open view or concealed. It doesn't make our law enforcement officers safer, it doesn't make any of us safer, and it doesn't make our community safer. Take away even those who wish to do us harm. I mean, the fact that they got rid of the training requirement, which was, kind of a joke to begin with, but at least it was something. Those people that are armed, even if they're trying to do good and respond to a threat, they're more of a danger to everyone else because they are not going to have the muscle memory that's required to proficiently employ a weapon in a high-stress situation. So what they have done in South Carolina, again, taking us backwards, instead of 1960, maybe like 1800s, like the Wild West days. June 2015, a deranged individual walked into the Mother Emanuel Church and executed 9 individuals because of the color of their skin. Did y'all know that that individual obtained that weapon lawfully, even though he was federally prohibited from owning a firearm? Because of the Charleston loophole, what's become known as the Charleston loophole, which is a loophole in the federal law that says if your background check, you're buying a gun from a gun dealer, your background check doesn't come back within 3 days, go ahead. It doesn't matter if you're a convicted felon. We don't know that, so have at it. That's what the law says right now. We have other laws on the books that don't make any sense. There's a federal law that effectively prohibits the federal government from having a centralized digital gun registry. So what that means is, this is an example, in Baltimore, one night we recovered a firearm, and I took the serial number and I sent it to the ATF, and somebody in West Virginia in a warehouse received that number, and rather than input it into a computer system and provide the results of the serial number to me within minutes or seconds, it was 2 months later when I got the information back. Because the federal government can only have paper files. And so they have obviously a backlog. That's an indefensible law. So gun violence doesn't recognize state borders. It transcends state lines. Y'all were talking about the Second Amendment just a moment ago, right? They wrap themselves in the last 4 words, shall not be infringed. What about the first 4? A well-regulated militia. And that, to me, the Second Amendment was intended for gun ownership to be well-regulated. And just because, hundreds of years ago, people wrote that down, look, I respect the Second Amendment, but at the same time, we have to account for what's happening now. The fact that gun violence is the leading cause of death amongst children is unacceptable. And so I do think that Congress must act to enact sensible gun reform. Most of the gun reform policies that we hear about, universal background checks, safe storage requirements, red flag laws, they're not going to take guns away from law-abiding citizens. And if you want to know my position on assault weapons, those are not home defense weapons. Those are not hunting weapons. I carried them in the Coast Guard when we would be searching for drugs because we knew that people that are running drugs are heavily armed. But they are not meant for civilian society. Those are weapons of war. So those should be, at the very least, heavily regulated. That's not a good job on guns. Yes, ma'am.
So I have 2 questions. One is, what are you doing to attract the black vote, to get black voters out to vote? And now I'm curious why you're a gun owner.
Okay, sure. I will first say this. This election, this race, it's not a racial equation. It's a voter turnout. So you have to make outreach to all groups of people. Yes, the black voting population is a significant portion of that population. They are the base of the Democratic Party. I announced I've been campaigning since last May, and I've been going out in the communities, a lot of underserved communities, a lot of communities that have never seen a congressional candidate before. In fact, I was in Jamestown last night up in Berkeley County for a community meeting, learning about some of the issues that they're dealing with in a more rural area of the county. And so I think that they, number one, want to see someone who's going to show up, who's going to listen to what their concerns are and their issues are, but who also understands and who maybe has worked on some of those issues. When I was an attorney for the town of Hilton Head Island, I helped form for the town what's called the Gullah Geechee Historic Neighborhoods Community Development Corporation. It's a long title. Hilton Head, I love it, but they have a knack for long titles. It is a community development corporation and the town was able to secure $5 million in seed funding for that. But it's aimed at promoting Gullah Geechee entrepreneurship, to provide for resources for heirs property issues, which is a huge issue here in the Low Country and throughout the southeastern United States. Pardon me. You know, families that received land after the Civil War, many times from the Union Army, but there was no recorded deed, nothing like that. And so, you know, after all this time, you know, land is passed down, but it's hard to resolve land disputes. And the fact that that those communities don't have access to legal resources when it wasn't them that created the problem, it really was the federal government by not having that accounted for with having documentation. So I believe in providing resources for that, to helping solve that problem. Also, again, you know, making sure that minority communities are receiving the investment that all the other communities receive. I mean, I've been to places like Cross in Berkeley County, where they have some pretty low voter turnout. And I'm not surprised to learn why when they're telling me that they don't have access to clean drinking water, or they have roads that are somewhat paved, that turn into dirt roads and they're just unfinished. That's unacceptable in the United States. So I think that at the end of the day, all people, regardless of race or gender or any other category, they just want somebody who's going to actually listen to what their concerns are, and that they're going to actually not just fall on deaf ears, but they're actually going to go and fight for them.
And why are you gonna?
Oh, gunner, sorry. So I actually have not fired a weapon in a long time, but I just used to like to shoot. I mean, I was a firearms instructor in the Coast Guard. You know, it was just something that I was used to doing. You know, I would say that, I mean, my guns are locked up. I don't keep one next to the nightstand or anything like that. But yeah, I enjoy the sport of target shooting, and I'm not a hunter. Yeah.
Thank you, John, for your comment. You touched on some issues that I know are very important to me and obviously people in the room. And it brings up a question in my mind. You talked about gun policy, firearms, and healthcare, and the fact that in South Carolina, the Medicaid expansion didn't go through. And a number of these issues, one that comes immediately to mind is women's access to healthcare, which is a very large issue that has sort of been playing out dramatically state by state since the Supreme Court ruling. So the question I ask you is that the frustration here in South Carolina with some of these issues, quality of life issues that you just referenced, access to healthcare, education, gun policy, these are all issues that are states. The state is driving these issues here, and it's a heavily Republican state legislature and Senate. But what convinced you to run for a federal office when a lot of the issues that we're talking about here really, there's so much work to be done on a state level, and so much right. So I'd kind of like your thoughts about why federal office, House of Representatives, rather than a state level, where there certainly is a lot of work to be done as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll first say that you're absolutely right. I mean, there is a lot of work to be done in the state if we're going to have any sort of progress. And so a lot of the issues, though, like protecting a woman's right to make her decision, you know, women's access to reproductive health care, I don't believe that ought to be a state issue. I believe that should be codified nationally, that all women in the United States, regardless of what state they live in, should have that access. When it comes to gun reform, you know, yeah, maybe states should be responsible for having a training curriculum that meets certain guidelines, but again, gun violence transcends state boundaries. So there should be national standards, national regulations in place to address that. And I really, I just do not think that we can just continue to kick the can down the road on those issues. And if we're going to go and actually get some meaningful change, then Congress is where it can be done. And we're not flipping the South Carolina legislature anytime soon. I'm sorry. But we might be, if we win this seat, I guarantee you the House of Representatives will be controlled by Democrats next year.
I was shocked to read when they were discussing this bill now that, allows people to just walk without any training with the gun and get it well done. And one of the key state representatives involved in this is a lobbyist for
For the gun manufacturers.
and it speaks to an obvious conflict of interest to me that I can't believe that happens in the state. So let's assume you do get elected for this district. What can you do as a federal representative to bring the state to better policies? Obviously I understand if we pass federal laws, that will supersede the state laws. But is there anything you think you can do as a federal representative for this first district of South Carolina to change the direction within the state?
I do. And this kind of goes into my philosophy on what the job is. It's twofold. You are an advocate, so as a member of Congress, of U.S. Congress, you're fighting to make legislation that hopefully gets passed that is going to be to help the country move in a responsible direction, your small share of the national responsibility, but also you're fighting for legislation that is going to benefit your district. So I would be focused on that front, that prong of the job. But the second prong, and this is where I think some politicians get it wrong, is being a spokesperson. And our current representative really likes that spotlight on her. Doesn't like that spotlight anywhere else. I don't see that spotlight up in Cross in Berkeley County that I spoke about. I don't see that spotlight on the state of beach renourishment projects and how critical they are to protecting not just our coastal communities, but our inland communities. And so you use the weight of the office to bring awareness on critical issues. I mean, who was the gentleman who was speaking about, you had the kind of, the talking points, yeah. Yes, sorry. There are some people that you are not going to get across to. I mean, I was at an event a couple weeks ago. There was one state house rep, he's a Republican, who told me he was a low country Republican, which is, he said moderate. But he said, I can't say this publicly, but I'm pulling for you. Nancy Mason's got to go. There was also someone that night who told me that the vaccine, that she felt that was akin to being raped. And she was dead serious. She was a federal contractor, and she said that when she had to get the vaccine, that was the same thing. And she was completely serious. I don't know that we can get across to her on vaccine. But again, you work with what you have, and you try to, when we're addressing South Carolina is 47th in the nation education, as I mentioned earlier. I am really concerned about that. The fact that children growing up here in South Carolina are amongst the least competitive, but that also contributes to, you can't talk about healthcare without talking about education and housing and your environment, right? Most of your health outcomes don't have anything to do with going to the doctor. It has to do with those other factors. So it's bringing awareness to them, but also working with the state legislator. So when I say, all right, look, I'm going to go and get a lot more funding for the Low Country, for the state of South Carolina, for public education, trying to work with them to find a reasonable solution with how's that money going to be divvied up. We don't want to go into a bunch of charter schools and totally neglecting the public school system. So I think it's about using the weight of the office to try to make room on the areas where you can and negotiate where you can, because look, politics is negotiating. And I do think that we need to foster more bipartisanship in Washington and definitely here in South Carolina. I think I got time for one more question, or yes, sir.
It seems like President Biden will be vulnerable on inflation and immigration, and that your Republican opponent would probably press us and try to tie you to the Republican, to the Democratic position on that. How would you counter that? And although it's not necessarily a local issue, it's an issue that the Republicans probably going to attack the Democratic candidate on. Those two.
I mean, I would say when it comes to immigration, again, I'm the only candidate in this race who's protected a border, our maritime borders. Look, I'm not for open borders. I don't think anyone is. I think we can, as Democrats, acknowledge that there is a problem with the flow of certain substances, drugs, the flow of weapons going to South America and Mexico from the United States. That needs to be addressed. And also the fact that there is a humanitarian concern with people when they are making dangerous journeys to get here. Part of my job is searching container ships. The migrants go into the cargo holds of container ships sometimes. There are low oxygen levels in those spaces, and there are a lot of people don't survive. So it is a humanitarian crisis as well. But at the end of the day, the image of America is not a giant wall. It's a Statue of Liberty. So I believe that people that want to come here to make a better life for themselves, look, if we strip away all the politics, they're just human beings trying to better their life. They're leaving not because they had a great life and they wanted to come here. They're leaving because they wanted to improve themselves. But I would fight back against Nancy Mace to say she had an opportunity to support a conservative border bill that would have provided more Border Patrol agents down there. That would have provided more administrative law judges to process the asylum cases. That would have capped, put certain caps on immigration and asylum claims. So the fact that that was a bipartisan bill from Senator Lankford, who's a very conservative senator, and that it was killed just because Donald Trump said we don't want to give Joe Biden a win, that tells me everything there, how serious they are about really addressing the immigration system. Yes, sir.
I want you and the other Democrats to take on Republicans and Trump and these election deniers who are a disgrace for our state. I mean, Mr. Clyburn is the only Democrat in the House of Representatives from South Carolina. Nancy Mace is beatable. Her politics are terrible. She is a sycophant of Trump and everything he stands for, including his corruption. She has got to be taken on, and we want you to take her on. Be easy on her. She is beatable, and she has got to go.
I love these folks. These are my kind of Democrats.
You don't wake up one day. I just got married in November. I'm in the kind of, I had a good job. You don't just wake up one day and say, I want to go subject myself to the abuse that Nancy Mason can be dishing out. Because it's not going to be fun. But I am here for it. And my commitment to you is I'm not going to let off the gas one bit. We are going to beat her.
Mm-hmm.
I need your help, though. So that's my commitment to you. But you got to help me too. So thank you all so much.
talk to next month. There was an excellent question, I think it was Heather, about state politics, which is pretty messed up here in South Carolina.
You heard it.
Next month on May 21st, which is the third.
I think you
Tuesday
did a
of the
great
month, and I just
job,
want a show of
personally.
hands of kind of a vote here, straw poll. We've got on the
I'll hit y'all up a little
agenda,
later. Share this out.
State Politics 101, okay? So Spencer Wetmore,